On the 29th of May 1947, inside the walls of Landsberg Prison, a brutal and barbaric war criminal who worked within a number of different concentration camps was led towards a gallows for his execution. Julius Ludolf was the commander and commandant of a number of small subcamps in the Mauthausen concentration camp complex, which was known for being one of the most horrific and savage sites inside the Third Reich. At the end of the Second World War, there were many different people who tried to escape any form of punishment for their terrible actions and crimes that they got involved in within the conflict. Many SS officers were brought to trial, some more senior than others, and some went to the gallows for their crimes. Landsberg Prison, where Julius Ludolf was executed, inside of was a place where hundreds of former Nazis were condemned. Welcome to The Untold Past. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Julius Ludolf was born on the 26th of March 1893, but like so many people he joined the Nazi Party with the rise of Adolf Hitler. He went further and he joined the SS, Heinrich Himmler's paramilitary group, and Ludolf was also a member of the Waffen-SS, the military wing of the SS. However, he would not really see too much action during the Second World War, and instead worked inside the concentration camps, serving in a number of different roles. Ludolf first entered the camps in January 1940, as the sites expanded to a huge extent, with more territory being taken by the German army, and to begin with he was given command of a concentration camp named Loibl. This was a small site where the SS hired out prisoners to complete labour as workers, and they were then held in small sites where they conducted different projects, such as digging tunnels in the nearby mountain ranges. There were 18,000 prisoners held in the two sites near the Loibl Pass. The prisoners there had no medical facility, and accidents often occurred in the camp that led to fatalities. The prisoners suffered heavily with exhaustion, and following complaints from civilian engineers about the conditions of those prisoners, as things were so tough, Julius Ludolf was actually sacked from his position as a commandant, and he was replaced by another SS man named Jakob Winkler. The site was a subcamp of Mauthausen-Gusen, but then in August 1943, Ludolf took over command of the subcamp of Grossraming. This was a camp that held political prisoners sent from Yugoslavia, as well as Germany, Poland and Russia. There were also 1,800 prisoners held here who were aged between 19 years old and 56 years old, and the acts of violence by the SS led to 227 victims being slaughtered, with the Commandant Ludolf setting the tone for the inmates. Other prisoners were shot and were executed for trying to escape, and it's clear that Ludolf had a history of overseeing brutal and barbaric sites where many people died, and they were forced to conduct a lot of hard labour. He was then moved to another smaller concentration camp known as Melk, and he arrived there in May 1944. This was a subcamp of Mauthausen, and there were barracks made for around 7,000 prisoners, and the prisoners were held in 18 blocks. The work that prisoners conducted led to the camp being better equipped than other camps, as inmates had some form of beds and blankets, but there was a huge overcrowding problem, as well as significant issues with hygiene and sanitation. In total, over 14,000 prisoners were held inside of Melk, and many prisoners were evacuated from other sites and were sent there, and this led to further overcrowding problems. The last transport of inmates was sent from Auschwitz, but Melk also had a crematoria which was set up. There were over 3,500 prisoners who were cremated inside of this, and there were almost 5,000 who died within Melk. As the war came towards an end, the death toll increased, and there were more dying each day because of Ludolf's conditions. There were only roughly 10 SS guards at the site too, but they were known for their brutality, and they drove prisoners to work very hard inside the war industries. Many made parts for Nazi aircraft, as well as weapons, but there were a number of prisoners who were also executed in Melk. A prisoner in May 1944 was shot for trying to escape, and during an air raid on the camp, 250 prisoners were also killed, and almost 200 were injured, and these were then murdered using lethal injection to the heart inside of the camp, probably on the orders of Commandant Julius Ludolf. At the end of the Second World War, there were many different concentration camp guards who tried to escape any form of justice for their actions, which resulted in the deaths of many. Julius Ludolf was a man who served as a commandant of not just one, but 3 different concentration camps, and because of this he was arrested at the end of the Second World War, and he was then brought to trial for his actions. He was brought along with 60 other concentration camp guards and members of staff to the Mauthausen camp trials, and this was held as part of the larger Dachau trials inside the former camp of Dachau, where the American military brought many war criminals to justice. The courtroom was made up of many American military personnel, and they heard evidence about Ludolf's actions as a commandant of different camps. He was accused on many different occasions of having beaten and struck prisoners who were held within his camp, and of authorising executions and killing with his own hands and weapons. He was accused of slaughtering Polish and Soviet prisoners of war between the dates of October 1943 and May 1944. Witnesses came forward and spoke about how he had slaughtered inmates inside of his camp, and as the commandant it was he who did order execution as well as torture onto those inmates who were being held at the site. It was his job to set the tone and the precedent of the actions for other guards, who also violently served under his control. As well as his own personal murders, he was also accused of having ordered, in October 1944, the execution of 16 Czech and Slovak prisoners who had been inside the camp's infirmary, and they were killed by lethal injection to the heart. Ludolf was also accused and charged with arranging the execution of a Soviet POW who had been captured following an escape attempt. Ludolf tried his best to defend himself, and he claimed that whilst he was a witness in his own case, that he never killed a prisoner with his own hands, and that anything he did that resulted in violence was done to enforce the rules and the discipline inside of his sites. He stated that if a prisoner escaped, then he would never have dreamed of ordering an execution, and he denied that any executions of escapees occurred whilst he was the commandant. But the evidence was stacked up against Julius Ludolf, and because of this he was sentenced to death, and he was found guilty of crimes against humanity. His wife even tried to appeal for clemency on his behalf, but this went nowhere, and he was then sent to Landsberg Prison to await his death sentence. He was sat on death row along with many other different war criminals and Nazis, and Landsberg Prison was an American prison where almost 300 war criminals were executed on the gallows there. On the 28th of May 1947, Julius Ludolf was informed that his execution was to be carried out imminently. He was chaperoned by many American military policemen and guards from his prison cell to the gallows, and he then approached the gallows structure within the courtyard. He was also joined by a priest who was there to witness his final moments and his final words, and he offered spiritual guidance during the execution process. At the bottom of the steps of the execution structure, Ludolf had his identity confirmed, and he was then helped up the steps and was handed over to the executioner, who was awaiting him on the platform. Julius Ludolf was approached by the executioner, who then placed a black cap over his head, and then the noose which was tightened around his neck, and he was then shuffled over the trapdoor, and after a few final checks had been done, the trapdoor was then released, and Julius Ludolf plunged through the gallows, and he was executed. Julius Ludolf was an experienced SS officer who was trusted by Heinrich Himmler and others for his role inside the concentration camps, and he was someone who was given command of not just one, but 3 different concentration camps and execution sites. He was known for his reigns of brutality over these places, and in his actions he was responsible for the slaughter and deaths of thousands of people. Ludolf for his crimes was sentenced to death, and he was one of a number of other commandants of camps, such as Auschwitz with Rudolf Höss and Arthur Lieber Henschel, and others who had command over their own camps, who were executed for their behaviour and work during the Second World War. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.